Let's talk about your second part of your final projects. There were a few things that were pretty similar across the board for these. Um, there was a lot of placing the logos rather than copying and pasting them. I did mention a few times that there were Illustrator files. You can actually open them in Illustrator. They're vector files. So that way you can copy and paste them from one document to the next, and you don't have to worry about any resizing or pixelization issues. The other thing is file naming. So for this assignment, for really the first assignment too, but I'm not going to be as much of a stickler. But for this assignment and this third assignment, I'm going to be more of a stickler about our naming conventions, right? So this is going to be like your one, in air quotes, warning. You need to follow naming conventions, right? I talked about in class how there's been a few different places that I've worked for that the publications have had naming conventions, and a lot of times the naming conventions are tied to where they run in the publication. So like ad placement. And if you named your files wrong, then your ads didn't run, and then you had a client that paid for nothing, and that's not good. I think that was pretty much it. Just making sure we have all the info in there, making sure that we save the file properly, and the logos. And I'll show you the thing about the logos as well. And we'll jump in. I'm going to try to get through these a little bit quicker than the other ones. The illustrative one is always the one that takes a little bit longer, so I do sort of apologize in advance about that. I'll run through this one a little bit quicker. These are going to be more sort of straight and to the point if I'm capable of doing that. Anyway, so let's get right into it. So these are the logo files. So you'll see here we have our AAA logo. So it's actually a vector file. So as long as you're holding Shift, you can make it huge and not have to worry about your file sizes. I'm going to close that one. Same thing with the Lions logo. Everything's all together. Don't save. Same thing with the LensCrafters logo. You know, everything sizes the correct way. We don't want to make sure that we're holding Shift if we do it that way, or you're using your scale tool. Because if we don't, then we do run into this kind of problem. And then if we try to reset it, it's better just to like copy and paste it again from the original file, so you know you're not distorting it. Let me not save that. So with this one, again, I did the quick demo of this when we first started talking about final projects. It seems like forever ago. But for this one, this is a super common thing with having guides in a document, right? It's kind of annoying. It made sense for this document, but when you start putting it into other documents, it can get in the way. So what you can do, generally what I like to do, is I'll go to View, and I'll go to Guides, and just clear my guides. That way there's no guides to worry about. The other thing I always do is I'll check if it's somebody else's artwork, I'll check the artwork to make sure. Oh, no, I'll see this is not a one piece. So I want to make sure that I group everything. I'll do a select all, make sure there's no stray points or anything goofy in the background there. And then I'll group. So now if I select anywhere in here, it's a grouped logo. I'm not going to lose any info. And then again, if we resize, we just want to make sure that we're hitting Shift. So for this one, I have in my scale window, I always have scale, stroke, and effects and scale corners checked. I always make sure I check. I honestly have never had a reason to not have that checked. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but for my personal use, I've never really had that happen. So if you don't have that checked, you can just go into your scale tool, hit scale, stroke, and effect. You can hit scale corners. Even though you didn't change anything here, uniform scale, don't change anything, you can hit OK. And then now, when you scale it, using whether you use your scale tool or whether you're grabbing it from the corner, holding Shift, that stroke doesn't get messed up. And I'll show you again what happens. Let's go on and do a bunch of times. Here we go. There we go. Let's show you what happens if we don't have those checked. I'm going to hit OK. So now if we grab these by the corner and we make this all big, see how that, now we don't even really have that stroke. The stroke changes, right? Or, I'll zoom in a bunch. If we make it smaller, see how the stroke isn't scaling? And then now we have this giant, ugly, gross stroke around everything, and it doesn't read well, all that fun stuff. So we want to make sure that we're scaling corners, scaling stroke and effects. I'm going to hit OK. So that way everything sort of stays intact. So these are sort of general things that I do whenever I open up somebody else's logo, right? All right, let's get right into this. So we will talk about Zinnias first. So here's, again, it's kind of tricky to tell, but here's again where we need to be placing the logos because now I'm missing the logos and they don't show up. We want to make sure that our logos are um, not being distorted, all that good stuff. So I'm going to go give or take about actual size with this. I think this is a really good start. One of the things that we talked about in the assignment description was there was no other artwork to be used. For a little bit of clip art, I don't necessarily mind. I see what you did here, sort of, but I see how you have the glasses in between. It's not a bad touch. I don't necessarily mind that too much. But the problem is we're going to be working black and white, right? So you just want to make sure, even if you wanted to do a darker gray, keep that value, give or take, generally the same, right? And then even for the blue, like the blue in here, make sure you select those, and you can even go with like a gray. So we just want to make sure that we go black and white, right? So for this, I might try playing around and doing, I'm going to select this first. Now I'm holding shift and I want to drag over, so I'm selecting these objects while deselecting this. What I might do is I might drop these down a little bit, and you can even make them bigger. You might need to rearrange your space a little bit, but even if you wanted to, depending when you can actually see the logos, even if you want to move these in a little bit so they're not like right on top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. So yeah, so you can totally see it better. I might make those a little bit bigger so that these two logos are in the dark spaces. This logo is in the white space there. And then that'll give you room. You can even take this line here. This line, not that it's a throwaway, but it's just a legal thing that usually needs to be in a lot of ads. I would just go with like a Helvetica or something like that. And you can even drop this down to 10 point and kind of just tuck this in the bottom corner, give or take, whichever corner you feel like it fits better. But yeah, you want to make sure you don't need this. You want to make sure that we're copying and pasting the right information. So I think for you, largely, it's going to be like kind of breaking up this information, right? For a lot of people. What I generally like to do is I'll kind of have what I'm using off to the side, right? I might make this a little bit bigger, bolder, depending on how big this logo is. Um, even if you wanted to, I don't know if there is a bold. So you can even kind of do these bold if you wanted to, but like play around. Um, even if you wanted to have the trick or treat larger than everything else, and you can kind of make this a little bit smaller too. You can drop this down to 10 because it's just like illegal, and then you'll have to play around with the, what am I blanking? The offset baseline shift, which we did in a couple of assignments. So that way you have your baseline shift there. And then what I like to do is kind of take this block of text, right? So what you can do is make sure that your returns are correct, right? So you have like this 10th annual site night. You can kind of break that up a little bit. And then like the contact info. So depending on how you want to kind of break these up, what I generally I like to do is all copy and then just paste. And then now it's in sort of like a separate area. So if you wanted to, depending on how you wanted to break this up, if you wanted to have this on one line this way, give or take, and you can kind of play around with sizing of things overall. So even if you want to make this like 24 point, and then make this go back down to 14 here, and you could kind of do, this is just sort of one way to do it. Oops, that's why I'm messing up everything. There we go. So you can kind of do something like this, make this 14, give or take, and then even make those bold. If you want to make it bold, you can even like spread out your text a little bit. I would get rid of this punctuation after phone number. So that way you have that, the important information there was a lot of others. And then, kind of break up or make as big or small, if you wanted to treat these as sort of sub headlines, et cetera, et cetera. I think overall it's just going to be kind of organizing this middle space. You might even readjust the curve of this. And then this way everything is kind of, yeah, so it's going to be kind of off there. So you might need to like visually play around with some of this space. But I think it's just going to be kind of like breaking it up again. I'll mention it in class, but it's kind of like that, think of that party invitation, the what, when, why, where, all that good stuff. So I think it's just going to be kind of breaking up this, these blocks of text and kind of arranging it for that important information. But I think overall you have a really good start. I like the graphic. I like, it creates some visual interest. There's some technical things that we need to correct, and that's about it. All right, going to Carroll, or Reese rather. Last name first. All right. So this is a JPEG, so it's getting a little bit washed out, or pixelated, not washed out. Again, I kind of, with you guys, with this one, I kind of don't like showing examples because this one's supposed to be sort of awkward on purpose. And I kind of like to give you guys, sort of free reign to arrange these for better or for worse, because sometimes it can be tricky. Rather than show you examples, because I don't want you to sort of, not copy, but, put those ideas, I guess, in your head. I want you to have as fresh ideas as possible. So, again, with this one, I don't mind this. It's a good start. We could definitely make this much smaller. Maybe again, 10 point is totally fine for just legal. I think your logos are a pretty good size. They don't look distorted at all. Maybe move the lens craft as well over a little bit. But what I might do with this one is, if you kind of wanted to take this sort of same space, right? This, making it smaller, might free up a little bit of space here. I don't mind your headline here, even if you wanted to make this middle line smaller, and then that would give you room to tighten this area up, bring the site night and for cause much smaller. And then it's just kind of breaking up this block of text, right? So even if you wanted to have like from here to give or take afford it like in this block, and then that way you could have your contact information across the whole bottom, right? And then have it much larger. For free information, free collection kit, visit, and then you could have site night larger, and then or call toll free, and then the number larger to fit generally like in this space here. So like roughly, tighten up the headline. So let's kind of give or take here. I'll just do colors just to show you. Maybe. So, actually, I would do. Ooh, that's an ugly color. Anyway, so like if you had headline there, and then kind of, this is just like literally blocking it out. Not unimportant, but information here, and then you had your contact info kind of on two lines in this space. And if you had this much smaller, you might be able to move these over a little bit. You might even try for information free collection kit, visit and the web address, and then or call, and then have the number here. Even break those two up, maybe see how that works. But generally, so you kind of have this sort of blocking. Even if you wanted to have this small, put that up this side, and then that way you could kind of spread out your logos a little bit. Just some ideas, but just to sort of like think about how we can block these things out to make them a little bit more even. But yeah, I think overall, great start. Davidsville. Okay, so again, this one, you can see our logos. I like this idea. Um, what I was thinking with this one, again, you can kind of tuck this either left or right, depending on where you want that. But let's say I'm just going to kind of block out the logos a little bit. So we have generally, the logo is about this size, right? Where's the other one? There it is. And then again, we want to make sure that I can't tell, but we want to make sure that they're not distorted at all, right? So I don't mind the idea of you having these, kind of bookended, I guess, for lack of a better word. You might even be able to bring this one down a bit and then just sort of spread these out. Maybe even make this one a little bit smaller, depending without seeing it visually. It's tricky to tell. But even bring these down just a little bit, give or take. But what I might do is sort of swap the idea that you have here, right? I don't mind the headline across the whole top. What I would do is potentially kind of swap this. Is this a text? Yeah, good, okay. Hoping it was area type. You could even swap. There we go. It's a 10th annual site night. Kind of break this up a little bit. There we go. I wanted to take this line out of here. I'm going to cut. Oh, I'm not going to cut it. There we go. So we'll cut that. So that gives us sort of like this space. And if you wanted to make this a little bit more bold, just so it sticks out a little bit more, even a little bit larger, give or take, you can kind of play around with this idea. If you kind of wanted to bookend that help the world see this Halloween, I'm not going to directly copy and paste it, but you kind of get the general idea. I'm going to hit return and paste. So if you kind of wanted to bookend this info, right? I know it says this twice, but you get this sort of general idea, help the world see this Halloween. And then if you wanted to have, I just copied and pasted the wrong thing. If you wanted to have the contact info in here a little bit bigger, right? And then help the world see this Halloween. Help the world see this Halloween here. And leave this area for your contact info a little bit larger, right? Kind of maybe not as big as this, but kind of similar to that. So you have your, for whatever. I'm going to go back. There we go. Got that. And if you wanted to paste that and then even have it here for a free collection kit or info. Yeah, for information and collection kit. Okay. Visit. So even have that on one line. But again, give or take. Ooh, wrong. There we go. So if you want to have something like this, and you can make it a little bit bigger, but give or take in this space. And then again, kind of have this on one line. Smallish. And then you could have you'd have to play around with your sizing, but something along the lines of this. So you're kind of like, not filling, but like, kind of using this space a little bit more. And then you could even have the help the world see this Halloween at the end, give or take what you wanted to do. But I think, setting up this space, even if you made this a little bit smaller, but I think sort of blocking this space, I think you're blocking with the logos rather, creating, more rectangular space to work with here, and then creating more square space to work with here, I think is a solid idea. I think it's just refining a little bit. All right, and then we'll go to Mackenzie's. All right. So again, we have the logos. I think it's going to be a lot of repeat information. That's why I'm kind of going through these like relatively quickly. But I think for you, it's going to be largely sort of organization. You might be able to make this logo a bit smaller, give it a little bit more breathing room around the edges there, and then maybe even enough room to tuck this on this side, sort of center to the logo, give or take. And then that opens up. It's hard to see, but I like the idea of having this visual here. So I think again, if you wanted to do sort of a trick or treat for a cause, if you wanted to make that a bit smaller, and then even center justify this text, play with your line spacing, but if you wanted to make these give or take the same size, let's play with your line spacing here. So you don't want it one. Oh yikes! But finding where that line spacing is. I don't know why it's so different there. You might want to adjust your line spacing per line. I don't know if it'll let you there. You might just highlight those. Anyway, you're sort of getting where I'm going with that. I don't know why it's not letting us do that. Interesting. Anyway, even if you put them on separate lines, that's totally fine as well. And then again, you can make that a little bit smaller. You can make that like 10 point, and then you have to adjust your baseline shift. But again, I think we're kind of running into similar issues, right? You have a lot of this white space here. So what I might do is, sort of break these up, bookend these, and then this way, if you wanted to have, oops, this one, if you wanted to have like this on one line, even double space, give or take, have this on one line, this a little bit more bold, this a little bit more bold. I would try center justifying it, see how that looks. I don't know what that is. And then that frees up pretty much, give or take. There we go. That kind of frees up this space to make your contact info, much larger, formatted differently, so that your website and your phone number are much larger in this area, right? But I think overall, super solid start, solid blocking, giving yourself a more sort of even space to work with, having a sort of rectangular space to work with, I think is a really great idea. All right, Erika's. And then this is also a JPEG, so it's going to pixelate slightly. I think for this one, I think mixing up your font selection a little bit, or even playing around with font types. I like the idea of having this at the top. I might make this either a little bit smaller or make the trick or treat bigger, just to sort of give it a little bit more size differentiation. And then again, sort of like breaking up this block of text, right? Even treating this as like a subhead, and then you're missing that help the world see. If you wanted to have that down here as a bookend, and then just kind of breaking up, that helps kind of break up this block of text, right? You could, depending on what size this is, like you could go a little bigger with this, a bit smaller with this, and then smaller with this, and see if you could have this line be on one. You're close, that is similar to this. Have this text be on one line much smaller, and then have this line of text be much smaller, and then that frees up room to open up these and make these larger. And then whether they fit in the space or you can kind of have it fit in this space here. I might make this a tiny bit smaller or move it up a little bit, and then basically give these some room to spread out a little bit. just they're a little bit cramped down here. Even if you move the all rights reserved thing over here, and you can again do that 10-point font. Even if you had it down here, that gives you a little bit of breathing room to mess around with this. But I think for you, it's going to be again breaking out that text, and then a little bit of, even if you went bold, like a similar font like this but smaller, bold here, and then have that help the world see, and then again sort of smaller, less bold, larger bold, etc. So I think it's going to be mixing up those fonts to break it up a bit visually, so it's not such a large block of text. All right, then going to Naya's. Okay. So this one is, again, super tricky. I think to have the main logo in the middle, obviously, as you can see, is kind of hard to work with. I would either choose like a left or a right, so that way you can kind of block out, if you have, even if you have an upper right or even middle. So we have like kind of like Erika's, you have, your headline at the top. But basically kind of block out the logo so it gives you a little bit more sort of traditional space to work with, right? So if you had, I'm going to sort of block this out. So if you had like logo here, and then that opens up sort of more of this space, even if you had an upper left, that sort of gives you, this space-ish if you wanted to have, kind of information, the big block of information there, essentially headline, give or take here, and then you could have, the contact info across the bottom, kind of, on 2 lines maybe across the bottom, and then your logos across the bottom, and then have that lens crafters, depending on what size that is, you can make it much smaller and sneak it along this side, or even if we had these moved over, even sneak it up this side, give or take. But having that logo in the center is really tricky to work with. Having it to the right or to the left, sort of gives you, more traditional, for lack of a better word. Like, you have this more rectangular square space to work with. You have this more rectangular square space to work with. If you can kind of think about compartmentalizing it and breaking it up a little bit, right? I think that would help to reorganize it a little bit. And then it's basically just going to be, you have your information broken up fairly well, right? So I think, again, putting these on one line, having to help the world see this Halloween across the bottom, breaking this up a bit. When you have that space set up a little differently, I think you'll see kind of how you can break up your text a little bit more effectively, but excellent start. All right, then next we'll go to Connor's. All right, so this one I think is, again, a great start. I think like some of the samples that I showed, we're running into a little bit of, whatever trickiness with reading it, right? Legibility is kind of difficult here just with the font choice. I think this font choice is decent for like a headline if you wanted to do that. I think you're blocking out your space is a good start. What I would do is make these logos much smaller, maybe adjust these to a little bit smaller even, to sort of make these look more optically even. And if you wanted to run them across the bottom or part of the bottom, that would work. And then that would sort of free up space to put that lens crafters down here. And again, we can go with a more plain font, definitely a smaller font. I would say maybe moving the site night down a bit, and then you could run your headline across the top, either in 1 line or 2 lines, depending on how you arrange. And then lastly, the trickiest part of this is going to be breaking up this, right? So you kind of lose, like if you were to look at this as an ad, generally people wouldn't really take their time reading it, right? So if you basically, any excuse people have to be lazy, they're going to take it, right? So if they look at something and it looks way too difficult to read, even though it might save them whatever, like thousands of dollars, maybe not so much, but they're not going to take the chance to, or time to read all that, right? So I would go with a more plain font, right? Break these blocks up a bit. Again, if you wanted to have 10th annual site night as a sub headline, and then you can sort of block out from scare to afford it, fairly small in the middle. And then free collection kit, give or take about that size, and visit rather, all in one line, and then have site night, the web address. If you wanted to have it that sort of font, you can, as long as it's legible as a website, but you definitely need to make it bigger so people can absolutely read it. And the same thing for, or call toll free, give or take about that size, more plain font, and then you can make the phone number much larger in that more funkier font if you would like to, right? If you're going to choose a funky font, you just want to make sure that it's large enough to be able to read, right? And then have the world see this Halloween, depending on how these resize. You can even run it across the bottom, give or take here, um, and have it, sort of in between your headline size and your smaller than your headline, larger than your body text, right? So I think generally overall, I think you have a good start with sort of starting to block out your space, but I think with, sort of adjusting that space a little bit by making the logos smaller on the bottom and breaking up those blocks of text, you can kind of find that balance between legibility, negative space, or sort of optical legibility, and literal legibility with changing font sizes and font types.